Hi, and welcome to Seeds. Ollie and I are about to have an emergent dialogue, which is a type of conversational practice that we love to engage in, where we just see what's on the emergent edge of the now. We just, with the attempt to really draw out the wisdom of the moment, to be actively listening to the other, and call each other into a co-creative, collaborative conversation, where really it's an emergent wisdom of a third, that's arising through a conversation. So thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy the conversation. So Alia, what are you finding yourself thinking about or pondering upon or spending your time with over the last week since our last conversation in this style, that you would like to start us out with?
Thanks, Aiden. Well, I think one of the things that's just been most present on my mind is this recent inauguration that we just had in our country on Wednesday, and it's Friday today, so just a couple days ago we had this big transition of power, and I'm very grateful that it was a peaceful one, and just noticing the different effects of transitions of power at this highest office, noticing within myself, and I think collectively within my family and friends, there might be this sensation of being able to exhale deeply in some way, being able to kind of take a deep breath and let go a deep breath, allowing ourselves to feel that although everything is not solved, and although there's healthy skepticism of how this new administration will hold this responsibility with integrity, there is a sense of relief and release of some of the preoccupation of focus and attention that my experience and so many of the people that I'm close to had, of really feeling this hypervigilance, needing to keep eyes and be aware of the actions of the previous administration, knowing that there's a lot of unpredictable behavior and a real strong sense of narcissism that drew a lot of attention to that administration, and that I think kept us collectively a bit on our toes. And so noticing this deep kind of exhale of like, okay, we still need to stay aware and abreast of what's going on and not have a false sense of security, because the times really in their largest picture haven't changed. The nature of the times, we still have existential threats that we need to grapple with as a nation and as a world, but just noticing a sort of affective or emotional difference in breathing a little bit differently, and sort of just curious about that, curious what difference it makes. We've been talking a little bit recently in the last few days about sort of symbolic leadership, or the symbolic difference it affects on the mind to have a different model or qualities of leadership, that we're kind of choosing to be the figurehead of our people. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that and to expand on that, and also sort of this balance of both the relief and the release and this exhale and the goodness of that, of like, we should be able to breathe deeply. It's so vital, especially in these urgent times, that we do breathe deeply. And on the other hand, how do we still stay, or even have that help us stay more motivated in the necessary work on the ground of what we can do as individuals and communities, and how to put maybe the focus that we had been putting on this highest office to make sure the previous administration didn't do something horrific, and funnel that or channel that into the domains of our influence and in this new era, this new aeon of this next administration.
It's so interesting, isn't it? The somatic experience of watching the inauguration and this feeling afterwards, and particularly as somebody who doesn't put a lot of weight in our political system, or a lot of faith that one side or the other is going to somehow solve some of the problems that I'm really conscious of, that I feel like are collective global issues, worldview issues, fundamental moral and ethical issues that are underlying the fabric of our society, you know, and our economic incentives. And I think it's just like it's too, I guess, deep or too deeply rooted for that level of our government to actually be able to solve and do well. You know, like I'm someone who really feels like the revolutionary change is going to come out from within. It's going to come in small group settings. It's going to come from localized actions of living into, you know, new values. And yet I still felt this huge shift. And so I was asking, you know, we've been talking about this, like the power of the archetypal symbol. And again, we talked about this in our last video, and coming back to it again, of like the real effects of a certain quality of character being at the head of a global power like the United States, with the amount of capacity for harm that needs to be understood. The capacity for harm that the U.S. has is so tremendous. Just because the size of our force, our military might, our weapons payload, our ability to affect the entire global economic markets. Like, we already cause a lot of harm. I'm not saying that, but our capacity for harm is immense, you know. And that also means our capacity for good, for actually shaping the collective consciousness of, particularly the Western mind, or those that are falling into sort of the Western paradigm. I think is really powerful as well. And so I think there was this tension, at least as far as I'm recognizing, of having sort of like a trickster archetypal character in the White House. One in which you're never knowing quite what you're getting, you know, like there could be something truthful in what he's saying, but you feel like the way he's saying it, there's an underlying motive that isn't fully explicit, or it's just a flat out misinformation, you know, and the way that it's just like made everything so confusing and disorienting. And I do think that there was a lot of narcissistic quality in this particular archetype that we happen to be lifting up as a collective, right? Like the symbol of the rivalrous game dynamic, you know, of our culture, the economic incentive structures, the types of individuals, particularly masculine individuals, that our society co-creates and arises out of itself because of our value system, right? And that like person at the top, like it just felt precarious. It just felt really precarious. Like really didn't know what to expect, didn't know how far things would go, or how extreme they would be, and feeling this shift to Biden, and not that I fully trust, you know, what Biden is saying or what he claims he will do. There is a different quality of archetypal character that just feels a little bit more relaxing. And you know, because of that, I think that, at least how I see it, and I know, like, I feel we've had these conversations too, is like that maybe actually there can be more energy put towards the ground, put towards our communities, put towards our local environments, put towards the things that we want to do with our lives, which in turn, I think in the long run, could create massive revolutionary change. You know, just having a different symbol, you know, not that it's going to come from the top down, but actually from the bottom up, due to a different somatic experience of life and reality. You know, the potential downside could be a going back to sleep, you could say, you know, of like, oh wow, now we can rest, we're held in better hands, and we can just go back to a state of normal. But part of me feels like there really is no going back to a state of normal. Like, what is normal? I think there's this underlying agitation in the collective consciousness that actually wants to start seeing something different emerge. And I think there are pockets arising of kind of honing in on what that difference is, of being actually deep relationality, you know, deep friendship and care, you know, connection with the earth, you know, truly localized, sovereign, sustainable, resilient communities. Not that everyone's feeling that way, but I do think that desire is strongly emerging. And part of me feels like that desire for something new is almost inexorable. Like we can't put it away. It's like once you open the box, once you start feeling the nature of reality, and you get just a little seed of possibility of something different, you know, I feel like you can't put that away, and eventually you have to retract all your projections and realize that you're a co-creator of that possibility. And so yeah, how do we catalyze this moment, right? This shift, this relaxation, how do we use that and turn it towards collective, you know, like a collectively generative endeavor where we are participating in and co-creating the new world that we want to see.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you pose that question, it makes me think about this sort of underlying assumption or inquiry around, is it sort of trauma and fast-paced response and reactivity and fear and dread that motivates true participatory sort of engagement? Or could it be, and is it in its best form, actually love and commitment and being in tune and aligned enough to know what is being asked in the current moments? And so just even to reframe that in my own mind, like a fear of falling back asleep, or what you said too about like, is that even really an option? I feel like I really do feel that at this point we don't want to be replicating the idea of like we need to be on our toes and hyper vigilant by this leader in office to keep us aware and engaged at all levels of our lives to be participating fully. Like, no, we want to challenge that assumption, and we want to assume and believe and call in and call up that part of the human being that actually can show up ever more fully when they have the time and the space and the baseline equilibrium and a sense of like at least this figure at the top is representing some moral, ethical values, at least speaking to those, at least signaling those ways of caring for one another and caring for the earth and thinking about the future generations that can allow us to settle enough in our nervous systems to actually feel what needs to be felt, and through feeling what needs to be felt about what it is to be human and alive in these times, be able to then discern what one's rightful sort of place and action is within this current moment. And so just to remind myself or come back to that of my belief that that actually is what can call in and motivate participation in action is enough of a sense of well-being that one can listen more deeply and show up more fully.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you were saying the sense of like hypervigilance in order to keep us awake and aware, something, you know, I've been thinking a lot about too, and actually been feeling deeply in my own life. Do I need constant pain in order to help me eat the way that I know I need to eat, or go outside and breathe, or you know, do the things I need to do in my life? Like I feel that in my body. I feel like a lot of pain when I get out of alignment. And I know a lot of people share that as well. And just was asking myself, is there a deeper motivation of just like tasting well-being and just striving for the possibilities, the goodness of experience, the just taste of life itself, being compelling enough to keep pulling forward. And I really think that mirrors this collective experience that you're talking to. It's like we need new stories, right? We've had so many stories that are telling us it has to get worse before it gets better. But the truth is like the essence of the pain that is the lesson
Mm-hmm.
is here in
Yes.
every moment,
Yes.
is waiting for us to feel it.
Right.
Once we feel it, we can digest it,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
the root of the pain, you can feel its continuance, right? So you can feel how big it could get,
Mm-hmm.
and just
Mm-hmm.
feeling the pain now.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to keep going down this particular path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of needing to be hypervigilant, needing to be constantly worried, needing to be afraid, needing to see our ecosystems collapse around us,
Mm-hmm.
needing to see people constantly get sick, needing to, watch this whole experiment get worse,
Right.
in order to feel something.
Right.
Like maybe we can integrate, maybe we can rest and actually start the work of feeling, which is starting the work of transformation. Which, and not saying that this isn't happening, I think it is happening in certain spaces. But does that make sense?
It does. It really does. It feels like part of this experience is actually co-creating and participating in the story of our times. And so we actually have the ability to name and decide and identify this as sort of the spiritual rock bottom that it truly is. I mean, living through the 6th mass extinction, 125 to 200 species of plants and animals going extinct every single day, living through ecological collapse and human injustice and suffering and disease and malnourishment and warfare, never-ending wars, discrimination and dehumanization. Like, we can name this as the spiritual rock bottom that we are willing to go to as a people. And by naming it as that and actually feeling the full gravity and weight of what it is to be this disconnected from life, from well-being, from health, from vitality, from one another, from the source of life, the earth herself, to actually be perpetuators of violence across ecosystems and across the earth, then that is truly what can inform us to take steps towards repair and reconnection. But it's almost like we have to actually, we are creating this narrative. We are part of this collective story, and we've told ourselves so many stories of these apocalypse, sort of dystopian scenes that maybe look in certain ways worse externally than what we see now. And so there's almost a sense of like the inevitability that this is this cascading effect and it's going to get worse in all of these ways. But what if we actually decided that this is as far as we will allow it to go, and we help then shift things in a different direction towards more vitality and well-being?
And that shift first happens right here.
Yes.
And then your life can change around you. I have seen it in myself, and I have seen it in others. This decision to turn towards the feeling, to say yes to the feeling, and even though like more pain arises and discomfort, also more beauty right with it, more mystery, more possibility, more relationship, deeper connection. All of these things, more meaning. All of these things arise with the feeling. You know, it's almost like this dual experience. The two happening simultaneously together. And so that shift can happen like in an individual's lives, in a group, in a community's lives. You know, while simultaneously we could watch, you know, terrible things happening in the collective sphere. You know, but as these shifts start to emerge, they will begin to lift up representative symbols of this new way of being. If enough of us are feeling, if enough of us are fully awakening to the moment, saying yes to whatever is stirring within, that's asking us to live our one life that's waiting for us to live, like saying yes to that process and saying yes to that collectively, like eventually out of those spaces emerge representation, symbolism of that new way of being, which then can help the collective start to raise its itself as well towards that destination.
Yeah, I really agree and appreciate that, and I feel like something we talk about a lot is the necessity and the call for living symbols and living models of new ways of being, because we have really developed these stories and narratives and sort of psycho-spiritual possibilities of demise and horror and apocalypse, and yet we feel this shift emerging within ourselves of the possibility of a new way forward, but I don't see a lot of living examples, living symbols, living models of what that could truly look like and feel like. And why the human being needs that is we are deeply somatic, body-based, energetic beings, vibrational beings. We need to be able to go be within a different group space. We need to be in relationship individually. We need to be in vibrant ecosystems that are alive with diversity of life forms interacting, to actually remember, to reawaken, and to give us examples to strive for. It's like that future sort of possibility calling out in real time towards us of what we can create at all levels of our own life. But if we don't have that vibrational, energetic, felt, somatic experience of what it is to be in relationship to real, vibrant places and people and community, then how can we really know how to build that? And yet we're in this transitional moment where we kind of stand between worlds, in this liminal betwixt in between, where we have this conceptual knowledge, and there's certain places that hold some of those qualities, but very few that hold like real, holistic, embodied, high vibe, just felt right aligned experience of what could truly be. And that, I feel like, is a real gap and is really being asked and called for, and the difference that that would make, I think, could help a lot of people leave the known familiar world of what has been and take a big step into what could be, because it just feels so freaking good and right, and it has this deep resonance with what they know is being called and desired at the deepest soul level.
Totally. Yeah, thank you. That was really beautifully put. And it had me really thinking about, this idea of not really even being able to imagine the best possible future outcome. Like a future outcome that's transcendent of competition, of greed, of scarcity, of war and violence, where we fundamentally understand that these old assumptions of competitive nature produces evolutionary growth, of like fighting against each other actually produces strength. It produces a unidirectional strength that becomes destructive, right? This sort of violent force. But there is a more holistic way of viewing nature. That nature is fundamentally collaborative, mutually supportive. Look at the forest, and this is why we've separated ourselves from nature, where we don't even have an intuition, a lot of people, about the way that a forest operates from this deeply collaborative, mutually co-creative foundation. And see it for what the textbooks say of this competitive, rivalrous, terrifying game of competition. And so most of our stories reflect that outcome. And so what would help us, like you're saying, these living symbols, this felt somatic experience of actually a different possibility that isn't itself what could be, because what could be is so beyond our imagination when we shift our worldview perspective. But it just gives us, it shows us a way. It's this actually could be possible in this way, in more and bigger and bigger ways, and I can feel it, and I can see it, and I can remember this knowing of interconnection, collaboration, and playful co-creation,
Yes.
which is the foundation of the evolutionary process itself. If we see what it has evolved, what it has created in this process, it's absolutely stunning.
Yes.
It's really amazing,
Yes.
highly complex.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so yeah, like this, what would help us, and you know, when we start talking in this way of like the problem landscape and the challenges facing us collectively and this other possibility, oftentimes a question could be like, well, what do I do next? You know, people could ask like, well, what do I do about it? What do I do? Like, I want to do something. How do we shift this? And the truth is, if you have to ask that question of what should we do, you actually haven't felt what is fully.
Or the invitation would be to feel what is as fully as possible.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Is that actually the pathway to answering that question is how do I feel more? Because the feeling itself leads to the action. If you felt it fully, like, it demands something. It demands a response. And so if we're wondering, like, there's this huge, immense problem and I don't know what to do, stay at the crossroads. I love that saying. Who were we listening to? It was I don't know how to pronounce his name. Yeah, Bio Akamalafe.
As best as I can say it right now.
He talks about if the highway is getting problematic and it's just one way and the only solution that's being offered is to go faster along the way to get to some future end that is just beyond your grasp, that what can we do to change all of this? It's just beyond our grasp. It's just over the next horizon. Like, actually stop. Actually stop and go to the crossroads. Go to a choice point now. A different direction. So stay with the question. Stay with the question and stay with what the feeling is under the question. And go deeper until it's moving you. Until there's nothing you can do but move, and that movement is in of itself the doing that needs to be done.
Exactly. Because the previous doing, because there's an acceleration or a necessity or an external threat, that type of doing is just a replication and a perpetuation of this sort of industrial growth society speed and pace that is actually also a product and a continuation of the same harms that worldview is doing on the world around us and on each other and on ourselves, of keeping us so hypervigilant and so reactive that we can't actually listen deeply. And yet when we slow down in the face of threat and fear and acceleration, that is what meets the problem on a different level. As Einstein says, like, you can't solve a problem on the level it was created. That is sort of our like move spiritually that helps us address or feel into it differently than the creation landscape of the problem itself. And so that in itself is sort of a secret weapon to respond to the dominant society and the dominant problem from a different way that's informed really by like a feminine, more receptive way of knowing and trusting than sort of that reactive, responsive, masculine way of doing.
I'd like you to say that again, because I feel like it's really important. Like, what you're saying is like really powerful, and I want to understand. I want to feel it again.
Did you feel it the first time?
I did. But I want to hear it again to feel the nuance, you know, or maybe a new way of even saying it that I feel like can land even more for me or work with what you're saying, because I feel like it's really potent and really complex. So,
Yeah, cool. Yeah. well, if this idea of like we can't solve problems on the same level they were created, it might be a slight butchering, but of the Einstein idea, I feel like this response of like the threats of our time, what do I do to solve this? Everything about our predominant culture is about doing. And so that's the same level of engagement that we're trying to respond or solve the problem as the landscape that it was created. But if we actually slow down and we come into being, we come into the feminine way of knowing, which you all have access to, regardless if we're male or female bodied people, then it actually allows us to encounter the problem on a different landscape than the one it was created. And that in itself is the first line of response that actually supports us in opening up other pathways of response that could get us to a different place than the continued perpetuation of the problem itself.
Wow, yeah. That is amazing, and very eloquently stated, and it's it's some of the foundational teachings of the Tao. You know, the do by non-doing.
Yeah, exactly.
The paradox, you know, and that as a society we've been exploring this doing place. We've been exploring the will itself, even to the extent of willing ourselves away from our harmonious connection with nature through this active doing, sort of like this ram, just and that feminine way of being, and how much doing arises out of being.
Yes.
If you place yourself and sit in a forest, like, you fall into this place of being. It's the energy that's all around you, but it's doing an amazing, crazy amount. You just experience the change in a forest over the 4 seasons. It's just mind-blowing. Over several years, mind-blowing. Over a lifetime, it's so magnificent. The detail and the delicacy of what's being done through the being, through the tree being its full self, which isn't just its doing on its own. It's a full. It's an emergence. It's an emergent property of the whole forest itself, of everything, every component of the forest, all helping each other come into being. And so I just see, like, it reminds me of this dream that's came back to me, this dream I had when I was 7 that's been working me really deeply lately. And now the dream, basically in the dream there was this like rolling ball of entangled human beings. I was in this village and we were hearing it and seeing it coming towards us. It's this huge mass of human beings entangled in each other, rolling over the countryside, consuming and destroying everything in its wake. And I was just so mesmerized by it, and it came and just enveloped me, just pulled me into itself. And inside of it, everyone was struggling against each other, screaming and yelling in agony, crying. It was just the most chaotic, and we were just turning and tumbling. And I was like conscious inside of this experience, and was deeply aware that we were all co-creating this reality through fighting against each other, through trying to do so much. It was just creating this perpetual motion that couldn't be stopped. We were making it worse every minute. It was becoming more and more and more dizzy making and sickening and terrifying. And then I had woke up and I was staring at myself in the mirror in my bathroom. The implications of this, the wisdom that has come from this dream over the course of my life has just been amazing. And recently I've been placing myself back inside. Like, I woke up, I didn't leave that place. That was the reality. I was trapped inside this tumbling mass of human beings. And so I've just been taking myself back into the dream, being there, and just feeling like wow, I'm inside this tumbling ball of entangled human beings. That's just what the reality is. Now, what's my next move?
Yep.
And I realized that the only next move I have, the only real sovereign choice I have, is to retract all my projections of what I think the problem to be, or the sense of something being wrong, or all of this stuff. I had to bring it all back into myself and realize I couldn't go anywhere else. This is just where I am. So can I find complete acceptance for this place? Which means fully feeling it. Not creating some alternate reality of just like some peaceful meditative state of bliss. It was like, how can I actually be in full acceptance of the moment? Meaning just being with it, feeling the full nature of it. Everyone that's entrapped in this space, and still be in this place of love. Love and acceptance for myself, love and acceptance for everyone around me, for the situation that I'm alive and conscious, which is just amazing. And that if I can even feel another possibility, it's worth being alive and conscious, because it's creation and it's amazing. And we're on this earth spinning around the sun, and it's an amazing experience to be alive. And then from that place, like, of just being with the experience, like maybe I could just be with the person next to me, with the actual human right next to me, in such a way that like maybe that person calms down with me, and maybe we can help each other actually calm down more through just being together. And then maybe that looks like something nice or feels good for even the next person, and they want to come and join this softer, like connected, loving, kind space. And I saw the possibility of that rippling out, of that experience, you know. And I saw that possibility because I felt like if someone next to me was doing that, I would actually choose to connect with them instead of all this. And so if I'm experiencing that, then others in this space either have the potential to, or already do feel that way.
Yes.
And maybe then we can connect and create these softer spaces inside of the reality that we're existing in.
Help one another co-regulate.
Yes, help
in
one
this chaos.
Exactly.
That your dream represented so clearly.
Right. So in essence, I feel like that is exactly what you were speaking to, of this creating a new paradigm. And the key I felt in my dream space was that I couldn't, it didn't work if I was doing it for some future outcome. It only was real and true and powerful. It was only a shift from the doing to the being. If I did with whatever I did next from a place of just desiring to be fully in the present moment. Just coming from this place of loving fully the experience of being alive in the now. And that through that, like, these future outcomes blossom. And you can see and you can feel the possibilities, and that's amazing. It feels like you can be part of something bigger than yourself, well beyond yourself. But it isn't the reason for the being.
Yes.
The being is just for the being in and of itself.
Yes. Because if the motivation is actually to escape or dissociate, that isn't actually true being. That doesn't actually allow one to be in what is. And so it can't be about something in the future or some possibility that it's leading to. It actually has to open up through the present moment, which is a deep acceptance of the pain and suffering of life and human experience. But in that pain and suffering is the miracle of life and the praise for the experience, to even be conscious of the experience in and of itself, which I know we think and talk so much about. And I just have so much like awe of your 7-year-old psyche that supported this dream coming into your reality to mark you in that way, and that left you having slept walked into the bathroom, locked yourself in there and staring at this mirror, which helped leave this imprint of, it's not just this thing that's happening outside of myself. I am looking at myself knowing that I am deeply a part of this. I too am human. I too am caught in this monstrous wave of human conflict and doingness. And I love that you've been revisiting this dream and the power of being able to come back into these places in our own psyches and work with them and bring the conscious awareness of yourself now to what your 7-year-old offered you across deep time, and be able to work with the potency of that at a time and place when you actually can work with that. And I love this idea of like, we can help one another co-regulate through this experience of chaos that we're co-creating, and we can choose to come into the being and the now and the presence. And who wouldn't choose that on a certain level? Choose presence and connection and remembering and creating some sense of solace amidst the storm. There are some folks who may not choose that just because of what it means to actually encounter that or choose that. All of the layers of defendedness and shame and guilt and sorrow that have built up in choosing hyperreactivity and aggression and other defense mechanisms, maybe too strong and big at this point to choose, but so many would move towards and choose a sense of connection.
And maybe those that can't choose, maybe that's to help somebody else be able to choose.
Right, to see the contrast.
Right? Because oftentimes, and this is where meaning can be made.
Yes.
That harm done to another, that person that has the wound, now feels something different and then chooses to transform that wound into a sacred wound, and become ones that that chooses the connection, that chooses the different path. That isn't validating the harm and those that can't soften, but that still, I feel like there's still meaning in their lives. There's still a role to play in the evolution and transformation of the times.
Definitely. Even just by providing contrasting experience.
Yes.
I feel like when we can see each other and a stark example of a way of being, it helps us actually come up against that way of being in a way that helps us discern and know and feel into what kind of way of being is right for us to be. And so when we come up across very rigid ways of being that are determined to stay in whatever that way of being is, that may not be actually self-serving, like in the deepest sense of what it can be to be life-serving for oneself, that actually can help open or charge or break through something of like, oh, I see through that example a way that I actually really want to be differently oriented towards life. Like that looks painful in a certain way, or that brings up sorrow for me in a certain way, or that reminds me that there's a way of being that is more receptive, more open, more connected, that I want to strive for and cultivate. Even if I've lost track of it, I haven't lost track of it to that extent. And so there's like hope and there's inspiration and there's motivation for me to move towards a different way of being.
Yeah, so the truth is, I was staring at myself in the mirror. And thus, the people outside that we can see and be like, well, maybe they're not going to ever let go of certain ways of being. When I reflect on my own self, like I can feel inside of my body places that are knotted, that are painful, that are holding on, and that are tense, that are tight, that who knows might always be here in my body from a way that I previously had lived. and the multi-generational process of what has got us here. And so there are parts of our bodies that are in pain because we're no longer moving and we're no longer being in a way that creates vitality and health in ourselves. And so maybe in this lifetime for myself, there's pain in my being. There's parts of my body that simply won't ever feel right or open or be free of the pain or tension. But maybe I can live in such a way that the next generation, if I am blessed with kids, can be engaging in life in such a way that it creates more openness. It creates more flexibility and more adaptability and connection to life itself, that pain will ease. And so thinking of this, and will continue to unravel itself as we move our collective, as we move ourselves over multiple generations into more right alignment with life and nature itself.
Yes.
And so this is where I really see the real need for a fundamental shift in our understanding of time collectively. And that we are fundamentally connected to our past. Like the past lives us in this moment. It's all right here. The genetic coding, the evolutionary imprint of everything that came before is what I'm arising out of. It lives in me. So the ways that we've chosen to live in our past, in my own past and also multi-generationally, shows up in the present, in our state of consciousness, in our psychology, in our belief systems, our worldviews, also our physical bodies, our emotional capacity. All of this is founded, is standing on our past experience. So if we can, I think that there's this spiritual trap in some ways in these times of this possibility, this sense of full liberation or transcendence. And I actually think that that's a projection of a possibility of a human experience that is way beyond just our one lifetime. And if we really come into body, if we really come into being, we can see and feel the multi-generational process that has led us to the now. That if we and then if we work with life, and if we work with the evolutionary process, if we become active agents and participants with life, we can feel the liberation. But it might not even be the full liberation. It's not even just going to be the full liberation in my own lifetime. It's a multi-generational liberatory process if it's seeded right. If you plant a tree in the ground and you give it enough water early on, and it starts to root itself and establish itself, unless someone comes and cuts that down or the climate dramatically changes, you can know that tree is going to live on for multiple generations. If that's a fruit tree, you can feel the future generations that are going to be eating and celebrating the fruits of that tree. We can be connected to that future experience, and so this is where I see like this invitation, this to fully feel what is, and to humbly accept our evolutionary and spiritual task of co-creating future possibilities. And that the feeling of what those future possibilities can be can live in the present moment. We can know that we are connected to the future ones. This isn't something new. This is if you look up and have heard or seen some of the indigenous teachings, this is fundamentally rooted and woven through many of them. This deep understanding of interconnection and intergenerational connection, and that we are life in service to life, in service to 7 generations from now that are going to be standing on the foundations that we choose to lay in the moment. That's not a small thing. Like, that's a real and true thing if we spend time thinking and feeling into it. What an amazing and immense spiritual gift and opportunity for the human being, no matter what you believe about spirituality or any of that, just the process of being able to be a co-creator of future possibilities, to be able to imagine future potentials and encapsulate them into seeds and plant them into the ground to be grown into time. Like, what an immense gift. And I feel like seeing that lived into the world is what we need, is this living symbol that we're referring to. Because it's such a deep level of being and living that I feel like is known in every cell of our bodies, that creates a magnetic draw. You know, that can transcend the mind and our thoughts about what should be arise. They come out of our being, right? Those thoughts can change based upon how we feel, based upon what we see, the images we co-create as a society, the stories we tell create the foundations of our thoughts and of the world that we co-create. We follow that creative impulse. Look at our movies, look at our stories. We are following the trail of our own creative projections. We've continuously done this over time. This is why we need to be conscious of the stories that we're collectively telling, of the lives that we're living, because our lives are stories to the next generation and to the people around us. They're living images of a way of being. And so if our lives are painting new stories, a new future is possible and can be co-created if those stories are compelling enough, if they're rich with truth and meaning. You know, then we can emerge into a new space.
And then we can have so much more access to the spectrum of possibilities if we truly are feeling into what is calling us across the kind of possibility spectrum, rather than the preordained ways of being that makes us good citizens and consumers for this current reality. But what you're speaking of in and of itself, this remembrance that we are in service to 7 generations, and we are deeply informed by and formed by the past generations living through us and speaking through us and informing us of our ways of knowing. That in itself feels like, again, a radical reorientation, a shift from the previous understanding of this mortal, separate, individual, kind of egocentric life experience that is all about me and mine and the longevity of my life. And that experience is inherently separating from the depth of time and our relationships outside of ourselves that actually have arisen us and inform us and create us and allow us to be sustained. But to think that I sort of arose in my own sort of fortitude and exist in that mirage, and I'm going to be judged upon like my individual sort of capacities is such a falsehood, and is such a story of separation that feeds upon itself and creates more pain. But to reorient ourselves into this deeper time constellation is in some ways incredibly humbling, because it allows like this sense of self to rest within one node of a much larger web of experience in depth right now, and also in like height in terms of generation and time. But there's a comfort in that too, that I feel like a relaxation and a peacefulness and a rightness, where I know that my life is arisen from this deep storying of life itself across the human experience. And I know that too, in my being, there is an inherent impulse to support conditions for that storying to continue, because I am creation, and creation wants to know itself across infinite possibilities. And so there's a restfulness of being that then can inform who and what I am to help support the continuation of the essence and who and what I am as a universal sort of product of the creative impulse itself.
Yeah, I really feel that too, as you were describing that. Just this deeper breath, and this sort of sinking in. Yeah, and what a beautiful experience to be a part of, you know?
And
the continuous ongoing emergence of life. And I think one of the challenges with this concept, because it's there through all of our perennial philosophies. If you just look it up, it's there. The Tao Te Ching is writing about it, like, you know, Christ spoke about it, you know, like most of the prophets like spoke about it, you know. It's just woven through different traditions. But we don't really have the words to speak of it, and you can't really even have the words to speak of it. You know, the Tao is like, what, you know, is in and of itself unnameable, you know, or unknowable, you know, and that is this eternal process of becoming, this flow of life, this river of life. That in each given moment we are rising out of, like forms are taking shape and then dissolving back in for the process of renewal. That arose me, right? So that co-created me. Like I'm emergent out of that. I didn't make myself. I came out of another body, which came out of another body, which came out of another body, which is held up and formed out of the earth, out of what we're eating. You know, evolved over, you know, billions of years of an evolutionary process. So if we feel into that, like that is in essence who I am, right? That's what's allowing thoughts to emerge. That's what's creating this dynamic living experience that I'm embodying. But I, in our language, refers to me as Hayden, right? This, and there's a truth in that. Like, I am distinguished. I'm a distinguishable from you and from others around me, and living a unique life in this particular time. But there's a deeper level that's there, right? Like my whole body and this whole moment is allowing for this experience to happen, is co-creating this experience. My heart is beating itself. My whole body, my cells are dying and coming into being without my conscious participation. And so that must be me too, right? Or actually the foundation of me, you know? And so there's an I there. There's like, what am I? But foundationally, life and consciousness, and potentially much more, right? But like life, for sure, I'm alive and living and moving, and I'm conscious of the experience, or at least of what we've called consciousness. And I'm adaptive and able to, you know, make choices and actually co-create with life. So that's a continuum. That's a continuum. And the foundation that life creates for itself is what creates the possibilities of the future, right? So if you think of it like an ecosystem going through a transition, you know, from savanna to forest, the previous foundations that life is co-creating is giving rise to more possibilities. And so the foundation of what was before creates the possibilities of what is in the future. The foundation that arise in the future create the possibilities of what can arise beyond that. And so you can go from a savanna to a forest. You can see these big dynamic fluctuations within ecosystems. And so that is a foundational experience of who we are. Now, we also have this capacity to be conscious, co-creators with, and also deniers of our own impulse towards life-creating conditions. And so in this life, this particular me is in service to the continuous ongoing experience of life and consciousness into the future. If we want this experience to continue, that's the question. If we don't want it to continue, then actually we have the authority, the capacity to end that for ourselves as a species. And
actually we're living within a society and worldview that is inherently self-terminating. And so even if we aren't consciously necessarily choosing to end that, right now the reality is we're living within a certain way of being that seems to indicate less and less possibility for life to continue into the future. And so that's just a fact to sit with and to feel into. And yet all we are is life and consciousness, as you're saying. And so it feels like we have a deep investment in being able to provide the living circumstances in which life and consciousness can continue to evolve and complexify and create new possibilities of wonder and capacity, remembrance and new emergence that are truly miraculous and remarkable. And we get to be a part of that. We get to be the incarnate example of that in this moment, informed by all the past, in service to the future, the actual living example representatives of that right now in this time, which is wild. The conscious actors of manifestation and of engagement with the world and with reality and with the trajectory of life itself. And in these potent times, to have that opportunity is truly a gift. It's truly remarkable.
And I'm feeling in that this like weaving together of like spirit and matter, body and spirit. And how important that is, I think, in this time, because like this quote from Christ in the Gospel of Thomas is actually coming to me right now, and he says, if the body came into being because of the spirit, it is a marvel. But if the spirit came into being because of the body, it is a marvel of marvels. Try to separate the two. You can't. What we know of spiritual experience is from inside of life itself. The traditions passed on, the wisdom, the knowledge is from inside of life itself. That is an amazing thing, to think that the earth grew a human body and brain with the capacity to reflect upon itself. That the physiology and spirituality are deeply intertwined together. And that isn't something to run away from, isn't something to, this life experience isn't something to disassociate from, to transcend to another spiritual dimension. It's to bring deeply spiritual awareness into the every moment of our existence in body. And that this body is a temple for the experience of life, for the worship and awe of what it is to be inside of life and creation itself. And so, that sense of interconnection between the past and the future is so deeply important for this spiritual reweaving of ourselves into the materiality, which we are rightfully disassociating from because of the amount of backlog of unfelt feelings, of unprocessed grief, of disconnection from our interconnection is waiting for us in the present moment. But so is so much more. Because you can't feel joy without being able to feel its opposite. Feeling, you can't numb one just to feel the other. And this is why both the experience of grief and praise is waiting for us when we actually open our hearts to the reality of what is.
Yes.
And that's through this call of worshiping life itself, of just the ability to be alive in this human body formed out of billions of years of an evolutionary process. And to be conscious of it is such a gift. To be in service to that, standing on the shoulders of everything that has been in service to this moment now, to allow you to have your experience for the sake of a future experience, interconnects us to the very foundation and fabric of the creative universe. Weaves us together, and yet we are differentiated, and yet we are individual. You are Alia, I am Hayden, inside of this experience, able to take our unique gifts, our unique capacities, our unique personalities, and offer those back as this force of evolution and change itself. That the very essence of you, if you live your life fully into the world, builds a foundation and impacts and changes and co-creates the future. It's just an amazing thing to think about. And then it just comes down to like asking ourselves, like, what do we want to create?
Yes.
You know, what do we want to co-create?
Yes.
And we have to give ourselves that permission, but only from a place, only from first arriving in the now, like what you were talking about, what we've been talking about is this feeling that guides us into the present moment. This transition from being to doing. From that place of being, then we have choice. Then we're able to become conscious agents of the evolutionary process.
Yes.
So the choice is waiting for us in our own arrival to the moment.
Yes, exactly. And maybe just to wrap us all the way back up to the beginning of this emergent conversation, maybe this change in leadership provides an opportunity for at least some of us to breathe more deeply in a way that could invite a deeper level of presence and being and safety and values alignment at the highest level of office in our country, in a way that could invite, through that being, a deeper feeling, and through that feeling, a deeper knowing of what is being invited and informed in doing and action. And so may this be a shift in era, in aeon, in collective somatic experience that could invite deeper beingness, that could help guide us towards remembering what it is to be alive, which is the ultimate gift of life and consciousness getting to play with itself in service of the longevity and complexification of life into the future.
And that's a prayer.
It's a prayer.
That's a prayer.
Yes. May
May
it
be
be
so.
so.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you have appreciated this conversation. If you're interested in connecting with us, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you, and be well.
Yes, be well.